Ever get that feeling like you're kind of wading through a sea of information? Wanting to get to the bottom of something, grasp a really complex idea, but feeling almost overwhelmed by the sheer amount there is to dig through.
Oh, absolutely. I think we've all been there. You want the shortcuts, right? The key insights without having to, like, read a whole library.
Exactly. And that's what we're all about here. Today, we're going to try to do just that with Edmund Husserl, who many consider the father of phenomenology.
A big name, a big idea.
Definitely. But by diving deep into his work, his life, and even the critiques of it, we can get a much better understanding of not only his key insights, but why they still matter today. And maybe, just maybe, walk away with a few of those aha moments.
And you've given me a ton of material to work with. We have biographical info, explanations of his arguments, and even reflections on his lasting influence. So where should we begin?
Well, I always think it helps to understand the person behind the ideas, right? So let's start with the basics. Who was Edmund Husserl? I mean, our sources tell us he was born in 1859, died in 1938, lived through some pretty huge shifts in Europe. But what else shaped him?
Well, his background is super interesting, actually. I mean, he was born into a Jewish family, but later converted to Lutheranism, which is kind of fascinating in itself.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole intellectual journey he went on. He started out excelling in, get this, mathematics, studied with some real giants in the field, like Carl Weierstrass, even worked as his assistant for a bit.
Hold on, math. And then he became like a philosophy superstar. That's quite a jump.
It is. But after his math doctorate, he switched gears completely. Moved into philosophy, studied with some other big names, Franz Brentano, Karl Stumpf, and that's where things really took off.
So he went from like equations and proofs to, phenomenology.
Right. But that math background probably had some influence, right? I mean, Husserl really wanted to make philosophy rigorous, almost like a science, and that precision might have come from those early years.
Interesting. Okay, so after studying philosophy, did he just like lock himself in a room and think big thoughts?
Not quite. He had a pretty solid academic career, actually. Started out as a lecturer, private dozen, at the University of Halle in 1887. Then moved up the ranks, became a professor at Göttingen in 1901. A few years later, he landed at the University of Freiburg and stayed there till he retired in 1928.
But even after retirement, he kept going, right? Our sources say he remained active, kept writing and refining his ideas.
Oh, absolutely. Husserl was a dedicated thinker, that's for sure. And speaking of dedication, we can't forget his personal life. He was married to Malvine Steinschneider, and they had 3 children together, Elizabeth, Gerhard, and Wolfgang. Tragically, Wolfgang died in World War I. Must have been a devastating loss.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's the whole Nazi era looming over the later part of his life. Our sources mention him being banned from the Freiburg University Library in 1933 because of his Jewish heritage. Eventually, he even resigned from the Deutsche Academy.
Yeah, talk about a difficult time. I mean, being barred from accessing resources, facing discrimination, it definitely took its toll. It's a crucial piece of context to remember when considering his later writings, especially his critique of what he called the crisis of European sciences.
Right. How could it not shape his thinking? Okay, so we've got a sense of who Husserl was, this kind of journey he went on, from math to philosophy, the ups and downs of his personal and professional life. But what about his ideas, right? Where does this whole thing, this phenomenology, come in?
Well, that's the heart of it, isn't it? Husserl is considered the father of phenomenology, this whole method for understanding, experience itself.
So it's not just like another philosophical theory.
Not exactly. It's more like a method, a way of approaching how we experience and understand the world. And at its core is this idea of uncovering the essence of things. Not the physical stuff, but the essence, the whatness of it all. And he called this process eidetic reduction.
Okay, hold on. Eidetic reduction. We're going to need to unpack that one. But before we do, our sources also mention something called psychologism and Husserl's critiques of it. What was that all about?
Yeah, so psychologism, in a nutshell, is this idea that logic, like the rules of thinking and reasoning, are based on psychology. Like they're just products of how our minds happen to work. But Husserl pushed back hard against that.
So he didn't think logic was just like all in our heads, subjective.
Exactly. He thought logic had its own kind of validity, independent of our individual minds. And this is where intentionality comes in, this idea that consciousness is always consciousness of something.
Okay, wait, back up. Intentionality, that sounds important. What exactly does it mean?
It's a biggie. Husserl actually got this from his teacher, Franz Brentano. And it means that any mental state we have, any thought, any feeling, any perception is always directed towards something. It has an object, Like if you're feeling happy, you're happy about something. If you're remembering something. That's intentionality, that directedness.
So it's like my thought about winning the lottery, even though it hasn't happened, is still directed at that event, that potential winning.
Exactly. And that directedness, that aboutness is key. It's what separates mental phenomena from physical stuff, which doesn't have that inherent directedness.
I see. So my cat might be sitting on the couch, but it's not like contemplating the meaning of the couch. It's just there.
Right. And that distinction was really important for Husserl because it meant that to understand consciousness, you had to understand this intentionality, how it worked, how it shaped our experience. And this idea became the foundation for his whole phenomenological project. As he developed his thinking, he aimed to create this, well, systematic and foundational science based on something he called phenomenological reduction. He argued that what he termed transcendental consciousness, that's kind of a mouthful, basically defines the limits of what we can possibly know. And this led him to redefine phenomenology as, get ready for it, a transcendental idealistic philosophy.
Wow. Okay. Lots to unpack there. Transcendental consciousness, phenomenological reduction, transcendental idealism. We might need a whole other deep dive just to cover all that.
You might be right.
Yeah.
But let's at least try to get a handle on some of it. Let's start with phenomenological reduction. Our sources also mention something called epoché. Are they like the same thing?
Yeah, that's confusing me a bit. What's the difference?
Well, they're definitely connected. Epoché, which is often called the phenomenological reduction, is like the first step in Husserl's method. Think of it like this. You're putting the world, everything we experience in our daily life in brackets. Like you're suspending your judgment about whether it exists, what it's like, all of that.
So you're not saying the world doesn't exist, just putting that question aside for the moment.
Exactly. The goal isn't to deny reality, but to step back from our usual assumptions about it, to shift our focus from the what of our experience to the how. Like, how are we experiencing this? How is it appearing to us?
It's like when a scientist controls for variables in an experiment, right? To isolate the specific thing they're studying.
That's a great analogy. It's about getting to the pure phenomena, to what's directly present in our consciousness, without all the baggage of our beliefs and interpretations.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. We're bracketing our assumptions to see experience in a different light, more directly.
Yeah.
And then comes this eidetic reduction, right? How does that fit in?
So, eidetic reduction comes after the epoché. Once we've set aside our beliefs about the world, we can start to explore the essence of things. Let's take an example. Imagine a tree, right?
Okay, got a tree in mind.
Now, with eidetic reduction, you start to vary the features of that tree in your imagination. Like change its color, its size, its shape, whether it has leaves or not. You see what you can change and still have it be a tree.
So I'm mentally morphing my tree, making it huge, then tiny, changing its colors, maybe giving it like square leaves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as you do that, you start to see what's essential to its being a tree. What features are necessary for it to still be a tree and not, say, a bush or a cloud? What remains constant throughout all those imaginative variations?
So it's about finding the core, the unchanging essence, the treeness of the tree, even if every single actual tree is different.
Precisely. And Husserl believed that by using eidetic reduction, we could understand the essence of anything, not just physical objects, but concepts, emotions, relationships, all sorts of things.
Okay, that's pretty mind-bending. So we've got these reductions, the epoché and the eidetic reduction, all pointing towards this idea of transcendental consciousness, which you said leads to transcendental idealism. I'm still struggling with that one.
Yeah, it's a big one. But basically, transcendental idealism is the view that this realm of transcendental consciousness, the one we access through the reductions, is the ultimate foundation of all knowledge.
So it's like my experience of this microphone, the sound of my voice, all of that. It's not that it's not real, but it's grounded in this deeper level of consciousness that makes it possible for me to experience it at all.
You got it. It's not denying the reality of things, but saying that our ability to experience and know them relies on the structures of consciousness.
It's like the world is real, but the way we access it, the way we know it, is shaped by our consciousness.
Exactly. And for Husserl, this wasn't just some philosophical theory. It was the basis of how we should be doing philosophy, even science. He saw phenomenology as this foundational science upon which all other knowledge rested.
Okay, so that's a lot to process. But there's one more concept that seems to pop up a lot in our sources. The Lebenswelt, or life world. What's that about?
Ah, yes, the life world. This comes up more in Husserl's later work, especially in his book, The Crisis of the European Sciences. And it refers to the world of our everyday experience, the world we live in, before we start analyzing it scientifically or philosophically. It's the world of our practical concerns, our social interactions, our feelings, our perceptions, all that messy lived reality.
So it's kind of like the opposite of the abstract, theoretical world of philosophy. It's the world we actually experience, not just think about.
Precisely. And it's interesting because it creates some tension within Husserl's thinking. On one hand, you have the phenomenological method, which is all about stepping back from our everyday experience, bracketing our assumptions, trying to get at those universal structures of consciousness. But then you have this idea of the life world, which emphasizes the importance of that concrete lived experience.
So he's acknowledging that there's this rich, complex world that we live in, even as he's developing a method for analyzing it in a more, well, scientific way.
Exactly. And how these two relate, how those universal structures of consciousness shape and make sense of our specific lived experience, that's something Husserl grappled with throughout his work.
I'm seeing how this all fits together, how his thinking evolved. And speaking of evolution, our sources show that his intellectual journey had a lot of twists and turns, influences from all over the place.
Oh, for sure. I mean,
Bro.
just look at his early work, like Philosophy of Arithmetic. You can see the influence of his mathematical background, his interest in psychology, especially from his teacher Brentano.
So he was trying to, like, ground math and psychology, find the psychological basis of numbers and all that.
In a way, yeah. But then something shifted. He started to move away from this idea, which he called psychologism. And our sources point to Gottlob Frege, another philosopher, as a key figure in that shift. What happened there? Well, Frege wrote this really sharp critique of Husserl's Philosophy of Arithmetic. Basically, he said, hold on, logic and math, they deal with objective truths, not just subjective mental processes. And this critique, it really pushed Husserl to rethink his position.
So Frege was like, math isn't just how we think, it's something more than that.
Yeah, exactly. He argued that mathematical truths would be true even if there were no humans around to think about them. And this really resonated with Husserl. It helped him solidify his break from psychologism and articulate a stronger view of logic as something with its own validity, independent of our minds.
So that was a turning point for Husserl.
Big time. And you can see that shift reflected in his later work, especially in his logical investigations, where he really lays out his critique of psychologism. And then comes Ideas, where he introduces the whole framework of transcendental phenomenology, with the epoché, the reductions, all that good stuff.
And he didn't start there, right? There are other important works like Cartesian Meditations and The Crisis of European Sciences.
Absolutely. In Cartesian Meditations, he dives deeper into the epoché and tackles the whole issue of intersubjectivity, which is how we experience the consciousness of other people. And in The Crisis of European Sciences, he takes on the whole scientific worldview, arguing that it's become too focused on objective knowledge and neglecting the subjective lived experience of the world.
So he's not anti-science, but he's pushing for a more, I don't know, holistic approach, one that takes into account the whole human experience.
Exactly. He saw this imbalance, this overemphasis on objectivity, as a real problem, a crisis even, and he thought phenomenology could offer a way out.
That's pretty relevant today, isn't it? I mean, we're constantly bombarded with information, data, objective facts, and it's easy to lose sight of the subjective, the personal, the lived experience.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why Husserl's ideas still resonate so strongly today. He gives us tools for examining not just what we know, but how we know it, how our own consciousness shapes our understanding of the world.
This has been a fascinating exploration of his work, and it wasn't just him working in isolation, right? Our sources mention his interactions with other thinkers, the whole phenomenological movement that grew around him.
Right, he wasn't just a lone genius in an ivory tower. He was part of a vibrant intellectual community. And one of the key things he did was establish the Jahrbuch für Philosophie and phenomenologische Forschung, basically the yearbook for philosophy and phenomenological research.
So like a journal where people could share their ideas about phenomenology.
Exactly. It became this central hub for the whole movement, bringing together all these thinkers who were exploring these new ideas, debating them, pushing them forward.
And then there's his relationship with Martin Heidegger, right? One of his most famous students.
Heidegger. That's a whole story in itself. Heidegger dedicated his most famous work, Being and Time, to Husserl, and they worked together closely for a time. But their relationship was complex, and ultimately their philosophical paths diverged.
So they had a falling out.
Not a falling out exactly, but a growing philosophical distance. Husserl became increasingly critical of Heidegger's work, feeling like he was moving away from the focus on pure consciousness that was central to phenomenology.
It sounds like Husserl thought Heidegger was losing sight of that foundational idea.
Yeah, he felt like Heidegger was shifting the focus away from the very ground of experience that phenomenology aimed to explore. And then there was the whole issue of Heidegger's involvement with the Nazi regime, which further complicated things.
Wow, so not just philosophical disagreements, but also political and ethical issues.
Definitely. And this all led to the famous removal and then later reinstatement of the dedication in being and time. Real sign of the complexity of the relationship.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. But it highlights something important, right? That these ideas, these philosophical debates, they're not just abstract concepts. They play out in real life, in relationships, in history.
Absolutely. And while Heidegger might have been the most famous, Husserl's influence extended far beyond him. Thinkers like Edith Stein, Eugen Fink, Roman Ingarden, who actually had some pretty insightful critiques of Husserl's transcendental idealism, Max Scheler, Emmanuel Levinas, the list goes on. These are all big names in 20th century philosophy, and they all engage deeply with Husserl's ideas. Phenomenology really became a major force in philosophical thinking.
And he didn't just want to create another school of thought, right? Remember, he wanted to make philosophy rigorous, like a science.
Oh, absolutely. That was his big ambition, and this connects with his famous call to return to the things themselves.
Yeah, yes. That's one of those quotes that really sticks with you. But what did he actually mean by that? Was he just saying, go
Yeah.
outside and look at stuff?
Not quite. It's more nuanced than that. It's about shifting our attention away from abstract theories and preconceived notions and focusing on the direct experience of phenomena. Not just physical objects, but our thoughts, our feelings, our perceptions, our whole lived experience.
So it's about being present, being aware of what's actually happening in our consciousness without filtering it through all sorts of pre-existing ideas.
Exactly. It's about encountering the world with fresh eyes, with a beginner's mind, and describing it as faithfully as possible. And for Husserl, this was the key to achieving a deeper, more authentic understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
It's about getting back to basics, to the raw experience itself.
In a way, yes. And it's a call that's still relevant today. I mean, think about how much of our lives is mediated through screens, through information overload. It's easy to lose touch with that direct experience, that immediacy of the world.
It makes you think about how you approach learning, how you approach life in general, right?
It does. And that's one of the great things about Husserl. His work challenges us to examine not just what we think, but how we experience the world.
I'm struck by the fact that even though he died in 1938, his work is still being published today. The Husserliana, this massive collection of his unpublished manuscripts, it's a testament to the enduring power of his ideas.
It really is. His legacy continues to shape philosophical inquiry, and it offers a wealth of insights for anyone who's interested in understanding consciousness, experience, and the human condition.
So if we were to sum up some of the key takeaways from our deep dive into Husserl, where would we start?
Well, first and foremost, he really wanted to elevate philosophy, to make it rigorous and systematic, like a science. And phenomenology, his method, was the key to that.
Yeah.
Then there's the core concept of intentionality, that directedness of consciousness we talked about. And the reductions, the epoché and the eidetic reduction, those are his tools for getting at the essence of experience.
And through those reductions, we get to the heart of transcendental consciousness, which leads to his transcendental idealism, the idea that consciousness is the ultimate ground of all knowledge.
Exactly. And while he explored these big theoretical ideas, he also recognized the importance of the life world, that messy, everyday world that we actually live in. It's this tension between the theoretical and the lived that makes his work so rich and so relevant.
It's been a whirlwind tour, but I feel like I have a much better grasp of Husserl's key insights and how they connect to each other.
And for someone like you, who values efficiency and clarity in learning, Husserl offers a really powerful framework for examining your own experiences. He encourages us to become aware of what he called the natural attitude, that unreflective way we typically approach the world. And by becoming aware of it, we can start to see how our own consciousness shapes our understanding of reality.
It's almost like putting on a new pair of glasses, seeing the world in a different light.
It is. And that shift in perspective can be really eye-opening. It allows us to question our assumptions, to see things from new angles, to deepen our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
This has been a truly illuminating conversation. It's made me realize how much I take for granted, how much I just accept without really questioning.
That's the first step, right? Becoming aware of those unconscious assumptions. And that leads us to a final thought-provoking question for you to consider. Given Husserl's emphasis on direct experience and how meaning is actively created through our consciousness, How might consciously applying a form of epoché in your own life, deliberately setting aside your usual beliefs and judgments in a particular situation, reveal new insights or challenge some of the assumptions you ordinarily take for granted? Or, reflecting on his critique of the increasingly narrow focus of modern science, in what ways do you observe this tension between a purely objective scientific view of the world and the rich complexity of your own lived experience playing out in the world around you today? These are just starting points, invitations for you to continue exploring the fascinating world of phenomenology and its relevance to your own life.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.